Hello, my name is Julian Cargiotis, and this is going to be my final project for our food history class. So today I'm going to be cooking a steamed cornbread recipe, and the cookbook that I took this from is called The Home Cookbook, and it was published in 1876 in Toledo, Ohio. And I'm going to go over the list of the ingredients that we're going to be using in this recipe. So it starts off with a pint of cornmeal, a teacup of flour, and I've got my teacup right here, 1 egg, 2 tablespoons of butter, 3 to 4 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 tablespoon of molasses or brown sugar, and then some sweet milk or warm milk. Alright, so now we're going to mix all the ingredients together, so if you want to come around, we can start mixing all these together. So I have measuring, but back in old times they would have used a literal teacup, a literal teaspoon, and a literal tablespoon. So that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to start off with our teacup of white flour. And it says we need to sift it, so just sift it right over the bowl. All right. And then now we're gonna do the cornmeal. So we're gonna do 2 cups of cornmeal for a pint. And the recipe has us using white cornmeal. So it's a white southern cornmeal. All right, and then we're gonna go with our 3 teaspoons of baking powder. I decided to use 3 instead of 4, just because I think it'll taste a little bit better. All right, and then for our last dry ingredient, we're gonna do 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. The recipe says you can use molasses or brown sugar, but I'm going to use brown sugar because I feel like my taste, it'll probably be a lot sweeter. A little bit more. All right, and then we're going to move on to the wet ingredients. So we're gonna mix everything together. Let's dry first. And then following that, we're gonna crack our egg into it. All right, start stirring that up a little bit. And then we're also gonna add our butter in here. And we did 2 tablespoons for the butter. So I'm just gonna stir it, let it get a little bit clumpy, and then I'm gonna start adding in the milk to give it more of a battery consistency. And then obviously we have our water heating up here so that we can steam the cornbread batter. We'll be putting the batter into this, putting this into the water, and then once we put this lid on, that'll start steaming it. And we'll cook it for 30 minutes and then it should be done. All right, I'm gonna add a little bit more milk. It doesn't give an exact amount of milk, so I'm just gonna be putting milk in until it has a good battery consistency. Not too runny, but definitely want it to get a little bit liquid. And for the milk, it says to use sweet milk. So we're using whole milk because sweet milk would be right out of the udder. So we're using whole milk and warming it up a little bit. All right, so we've added all of our milk, and as you can see, we have a battery consistency. So now we're gonna put our cornbread batter into this cup right here. All right, and then to steam it, we're gonna cover this with aluminum foil and then place it into the boiling water. All right, place that in there. Make sure this is on tight. And then we put the lid on and we let it cook for a half an hour. Yeah. All right, so while we have our cornbread steaming here, I'm gonna go over some facts about the recipe and how it relates to our cookbook and our class. So cornbread is like a classic Southern food here in the USA, but there's also a lot of interesting history that connects it to our class and the cookbook itself. So the main ingredient is cornmeal, and originally corn was discovered by the Old World of Europe when they colonized the Americas. And when European countries brought maize back, it wasn't very popular. It was seen as sort of like a low quality food and only for like the lower class in Europe. But now, obviously it's a staple around the world, and especially in the South of the USA, where it's one of the biggest staple soul foods. So with this cookbook being published in Ohio, corn is really prevalent in a lot of these recipes. It's a staple crop in Ohio, and a lot of that has to do with the scientific advances and crossbreeding of corn. So Charles Darwin was the first to experiment with corn hybrids in 1871, and this would be really important to Ohio in the near future. And so I have a quote here from Christopher Cuomo, who wrote in his article, Ohio in the Era of Hybrid Corn. He wrote, in 1933, farmers in the Corn Belt planted 1% of acreage to hybrids, and then 10 years later in 1943, they planted 90% of acreage to hybrids. And then he then goes on to mention how the yield of corn in Ohio went from 33 bushels per acre to 74 from 1936 to 1965. So this is obviously a huge change, and you can see from the numbers just how influential crossbreeding was to corn, and especially in Ohio, and why Ohio corn is such a staple crop. And so that's also one of the biggest reasons why I chose to use a corn-based recipe, because we have such a long history of being a corn producer, and I really wanted to highlight that in my presentation today. Go. All right, so we ended up cooking it for about 15 or 20 minutes longer, just because we didn't think it was done to our liking. And now we're gonna go ahead and cut into it and see what it looks like. So we'll take the foil off and you can see the cornbread right there. I think it looks pretty good. It's definitely soft. Oh yeah, it's definitely like runny in the middle. Hopefully that's fine. I'll take a bite anyway. It's really not bad. Although the center is definitely like still liquid. All right, so we're gonna let it cook for about a half hour longer just to finish it off. It was good enough. I thought it tasted pretty good, so I want to cook it through and actually like eat it. But yeah, thank you for watching this video. I feel like the recipe would have worked out a lot better if it was 1874 right now. There wasn't a ton of in-depth instructions, so we kind of had to guess with our container size and the heat and everything. But I think it turned out pretty tasty, and yeah, thank you.